Good evening. My name is Yoon Nam, and I'm the Cultural Attaché at the U.S. Consulate in Mumbai. Thanks to everyone for joining today's program, Prejudice and Pride, the opening session of the Beyond the Binary series, hosted by the U.S. Consulate. Today's program is one of the Consulate's many public diplomacy efforts to engage Indian citizens in topics important to the peace, prosperity, and democracies of both the United States and India. We have a fantastic program today that, in my view, gets to the heart of democracy. I think anyone would agree that freedom and equality are the bases of any true democracy. But exactly what freedom and what equality mean, and to whom they should apply, have often been contentious. We have some incredible speakers today who will share their perspectives and stories, and along the way might even lead you to consider or reconsider what freedom and equality mean to you. Today's program was designed to be a discussion, not just among the speakers on the screen, but also with you. So throughout the program, if you have a question or comment, we ask that you put it into the Q&A box. And of course, as today's conversation may touch on personal or contentious issues, we ask that all questions and comments be respectful. Okay, and with that, it's my honor to introduce the first speaker. A native of New York and a career diplomat since 1992, David Rands is the Consul General of the United States of America in Mumbai. Mr. Rands previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Pakistan. Prior to that, Mr. Rands was Director of the Office of Pakistan Affairs. His previous assignments include leadership positions at the US embassies in Cairo and Baghdad. Mr. Rands has also served in Rabat, Jerusalem, and Karachi. C.G. Rands, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Yoon, for the introduction. Good evening to everybody and happy Pride. I am thrilled to welcome you to the inaugural session of the dialogue series, Beyond the Binary, which celebrates the LGBTQI+ community, shares their successes and struggles, and helps us all better understand how we can come together to create a society and a world where all are welcome to be their true and full selves. It's fitting that we're launching this series today. On June 28, 1969, a time when homosexuality was illegal in almost every state in the United States, police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York City, my hometown. The raid set off fierce demonstrations by members of the queer community that lasted several days and was commemorated the following year with the first ever Gay Pride Parade. The Stonewall riots would later be recognized as a turning point for the LGBT rights movement. It's the reason that June is celebrated as Pride Month in America today. I also think it is appropriate that we launch this series as Pride Month comes to a close, because the challenge before us, promoting and protecting the human rights of LGBTQI+ people everywhere, demands our continual attention and action all year long. On his very first day in office, President Biden issued a presidential memorandum reaffirming that it is the policy of the United States to pursue an end to violence and discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or sex characteristics, and to lead by the power of our example in the cause of advancing the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons around the world. At the US Consulate in Mumbai, we are committed to advancing this policy to the fullest extent possible. This past June 1st, I had the honor of leading more than 50 members of the consulate community as we hoisted the pride flag over the US Consulate in Mumbai for the first time in history. I am pleased to note that Alexander Hunt, who helped raise the flag, is moderating today's discussion. And just last week, I was honored to officially open the Humsafars Trust's first One World International Queer Film Festival, which the consulate supported with a grant. Some of you might assume that acceptance of queer identities is a long settled issue in American society. But in fact, as recently as 1994, only about half of Americans thought homosexuality should be accepted by society. Yet only 25 years later, in 2019, more than 70% said it should be accepted. How did American societal attitudes shift so rapidly? No doubt there are many contributing factors, including demographic changes and effective advocacy by LGBTQI+ rights groups. But I believe that the increasing visibility of queer individuals played a significant role in this change. As more LGBTQI+ people bravely decided to come out of the closet and openly identify as queer, more of their friends and family came to understand their realities and accept them as they are. Acceptance sometimes came just from the realization that people already knew and cared about a queer person. Gradually but steadily, the social stigma that had been so seemingly permanent was punctured and deflated. This is why the sharing of people's lived experiences is so important and why I am so proud to have the U.S. Consulate host today's session. I'd like to thank today's guest speakers, Winnie Chopra and Gurleen Arora, for sharing their stories with us today. Your courage and inspiration on LGBTQI+ issues in India is an inspiration. I'd also like to thank Alexander, our consulate's representative of Gays and Lesbians in Foreign Affairs Agencies, or GLIFA, the US State Department's LGBT Employee Resource Group, for moderating today's discussion. And finally, I'd like to thank Koyal Sen of our Public Affairs section for conceiving of and organizing the Beyond Binary series. I look forward to a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, CG Ranch, for those wonderful remarks. Okay, now I'll introduce the moderator of today's discussion, my colleague and friend, Alexander Hunt. Alexander joined the consular section at the US Consulate in Mumbai in January 2020 after completing his first assignment in Ecuador. He joined the Foreign Service in 2016 after spending 5 years overseas, mostly in India, where he managed an international exchange program, consulted for UNESCO, worked as a marketing strategist for a think tank, and taught world languages to foreign diplomats serving in Delhi. He previously worked as a buyer and marketing director for a French art and antiques import company. Alexander holds a bachelor's in French and European Studies from the University of Arkansas and received a bachelor's in piano performance from conservatories in Russia and Italy. He's earned his master's in international relations and European Studies from Central European University in Budapest, Hungary. He speaks French, Italian, Spanish, Russian, and Hindi. In other words, he's a very talented guy. So Alexander, thank you so much for moderating today's event. This is your stage, and I pass you the mic.
Thank you so much, Yoon. I appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here today, and I'm so happy to see so many participants joining us. We're, as you all know, we're here to discuss with our panelists a little bit about the lesbian experience here in India. So I just want to flag for all of you that we will be taking questions from all of you throughout this discussion. So please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So as a member of the LGBTQ community who spent 5 years of my life in India, I'm so honored to be moderating today, and I want to start by introducing our speakers. We have with us today Winnie Chopra, who has been an out and proud queer individual since her early teens. With a postgraduate degree in business administration from the UK, Winnie has worked mostly in the corporate world, and she spent the majority of her life abroad and has had supportive friends and family by her side. Together with her partner, Gurleen, she founded the online space, The Gay Gays Bombay, which provides a safe space to queer individuals to express themselves without any inhibition. Thank you so much for being with us today, Winnie.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
And we also have today Gurleen Arora. Gurleen was brought up in a conservative Sikh family in Mumbai and was in a heterosexual marriage for 6 years until recently when she came out as queer. A fashion designer by training, Gurleen has donned many hats, including performing artist, writer, costume designer, and traveler. Gurleen co-founded the Gay Gays Bombay with Winnie. Gurleen, thank you as well for being here today.
Thank you so much, Alexander. What a lovely introduction to both of us. Thank you.
Really, we are so lucky to have you both, and we're so grateful that you're here to spend your time with us today. I want to start with you, Winnie, I'm gonna just jump right in, and I want to ask you a little bit about how being lesbian in Indian society is different from being a gay man, perhaps, especially as it relates to the stigma surrounding LGBTQ individuals in India.
Uh, I'm sorry, my name is Winnie, as Alexander said, and my pronouns are she and her. And I think this is a very relevant question because everyone from the community does go through homophobia. And it's not just the lesbians or the gay men. I think the trans folks have it the worst. And they're the ones who are mostly kicked out of their families and disowned by their families. But being a lesbian in India for me has been very different from when I was staying in UK, because in UK I'm just like any other human being. It was not any stares at me or any kind of a judgment that was thrown towards me. But being a lesbian in India has been difficult, and I have gone through a lot of homophobia through school, through a lot of bullying, and also right now when I'm already 41, I've been out and proud for the past 28 years. But we constantly face homophobia even for our basic needs of looking for a house. So when we tell people that the owners, especially, or the society, that we are partners, it's very difficult for them to accept that, because we've all grown up in such heteronormative backgrounds that it's very difficult to understand that two women can be together and two men can be together. And it is very different for lesbians and gay men, because I feel gay men are still, they're still men in the Indian society, and men have always been given this higher standard when it comes to our patriarchy, because we've all grown up like that in India. So I wouldn't say it's a shorter stick that we have, but it is for us as women, as it is, it's difficult in India. And then being in love with someone from the same sex makes it even more hard for us to come through, and for people to take us more seriously, whether it's in our personal lives or professional lives. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Gurleen, do you have anything to add? I know you've come out more recently. I'm curious what your experience has been so far.
I grew
yeah.
I grew up in a family which was very, very conservative. When I was really young and I was in school, I went to a girls' convent school, and there were a whole lot of young girls who were allegedly in relationships or like in situations with other girls, and this was a known fact amongst everybody, but it was never really kind of spoken of openly. And when they did when they did start to find out about girls actually being in relationships with each other, they were ostracized and looked down upon. Their families were dragged into it, and they were really, really disrespected in front of the entire school, in front of their peers, and I was kind of watching from a background, like from a distance, and I realized that that this was a life that I could never really lead, and that this was a choice that I could never really make, despite the fact that I did have those feelings. I chose for myself otherwise because I was afraid. I was really, really scared. And I think that's what happens with most queer people, is that we spend most of our lives in fear. And before we can grow up to realize that some of us did have the courage or could find out the ways and means to actually come out, or to figure out a support system, and which takes a very, very long time. So if we have that from a younger age, it makes a really big difference, I think. And that's something we don't have as women, definitely don't have as women.
You know, I'd like to build on that, because I know Gurleen and Winnie, you both had different experiences coming out in India and different journeys. And so I think that's really interesting. It'd be interesting to hear each of your perspectives on sort of what your journey was like, and also if you have any any advice for that you could give to a young woman who in India who knows she's lesbian and hasn't yet felt comfortable enough to come out of the closet, especially considering the two different backgrounds you each come from. Let's start with you, Gurleen. Since you've come out more recently, I'd love to hear sort of your experience, but also, yeah, what advice you may have for someone in India.
I came out, I'm 33 years old now. I came out to my parents just about a couple of months ago, about 2, maybe 3 months ago. And I was married before that, like you already mentioned in my introduction. But yes, basically for me, I always knew since I was very, very young, since I was about 13 years old, I knew because the first person I ever fell in love with was a girl. And I was still in school then. And I realized that there was so much homophobia and that there was so much hate attached to the idea that I just decided that I was never going to be able to live this life for myself. So almost immediately I chose to go down the heterosexual path. I started dating men, boys then, and then just very naturally kind of fell into this rhythm which suited society, right? Without realizing that I was suppressing a part of myself. And most of that part of me, which actually wanted to be with women, was me living in the shadows, me not acting on it. But I would always kind of like, I would always watch films which had any kind of lesbian content. I would always read books. I was always interested in anything that came up in the news or anything. That was the only news I ever wanted to read. I wanted to know more about what was going on in the LGBTQIA space. And so I had done all of my theory, but I fell in love with a man and then I got married to him about 6.5 years ago. And I was in a very good space, actually, as far as my relationship with him was concerned. But what I didn't realize was that my relationship with myself was suffering a lot and that I had to suppress this side of myself over and over and over again because I was married to a sailor and he would go off for 6 months at a stretch. And I would be alone with myself in those moments, which is when I had to face my reality. And those were the times that I really struggled. And with every passing year, it started to become really, really difficult until I went to Germany once for a trip. And I attended Pride over there for the first time. It was my very first Pride just 2 years ago, just before the lockdown. And I went with my then husband. He planned the trip for me. And then once I went to Berlin, I realized I felt like it was torture for me because he was trying to show support because he always knew that this was a part of me that I wanted to explore. But I did not have any actual permission, so to speak, to actually act on what I wanted to do. But then when I was between all of these people who were out and proud and living their truth is when I felt like as though I was a dog on a leash, and I wasn't being allowed to live my truth. That's when I finally decided to break away and live my life on my own terms. Soon after that, I met Winnie. I almost instantly fell in love with her. And I couldn't keep it in me for any longer. I had already come out to my husband, and later on I needed to come out to my parents because I didn't want to keep it from them anymore. And I did. And I thought that my father would die because he's a heart patient. And I most definitely thought that he was going to get another heart attack after I told him that my marriage had ended and that I am now with a woman. But I think I decided to come from it from a space of love. And I told him that this is something that's bringing me a lot of joy. It's bringing me a lot of happiness. This is the life I want to live. And then he kind of came around to it. So yeah, that was the journey in concise.
Well,
Sorry if
I really admire your courage, and I think, as a gay man myself, coming out, it is so scary. It's so daunting at any age. And but then, often once you do, it feels like such a weight lifted, even though it's
Yes.
difficult. And then, the phrase "it gets better," I think that, that is true. But I don't know. I'd love to hear, Winnie, your take here as well, and a little bit of your perspective on this, since you came out quite a long time before, or, a lot longer ago than Gurleen.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Sure. So I came out at the age of 13, and I was living in Nigeria at that time with my parents, and I was in Lagos. And I came out to my mother first, and I told her that, I really like girls. And she thought it's a phase, like all Indian parents or all parents around the world, I'm sure. And she actually got a shock when I started getting my first girlfriend home at the age of 16 or 17. And then she realized that this is not a phase, this is actually happening. And she went on kind of a hunger strike for like 3 days. And I was very worried. I was like, oh my God, my mom's not eating, and my mom's my favorite person. And I do not want to hurt her at all. So I got really worried, and I was like, and my dad came to me and he said, don't worry about it. Your mom's been eating at night. She's just not been telling you about it. So it was such a sigh of relief. And on the 4th day, I told my mom that, let's just cut this drama and have lunch together. And whatever questions you have, I'll answer them. This isn't a phase, and this is me. But I think this part, I don't say it very often because I like to make a happy story out of my coming out story, because we have so many sappy stories out there. But I had to come out to my mom again at the age of 37 because she was really unwell and she was losing her memory. So it was kind of a shocker to me because I had already done this so many years ago, and I was living my life out and proud, and everyone around knew me, my colleagues, my friends, everyone knew me as an out and proud butch lesbian. But then when I had to come out to her again, it was really painful. But I realized that it's not her fault, it's her illness. And so I had to do this entire journey with her again. Luckily, she didn't go on a hunger strike at that time. But yeah, so that's been my journey. And for people who want to come out, I would tell them that first thing, it has to be a very, very safe environment, because you don't know how people around you would react. You don't know how your own parents would react, because as long as, Alexander, it's out of your house, it's your kid's friend, it's absolutely fine. But as soon as that comes into your house, it becomes homophobia. It is so internalized that people don't even realize it. And so I always say there has to be a very safe environment for you to come out. And if you feel that your parents or your family members are going to react in a way which is going to be abusive, then you need to have a safe place to go to, either your friends or your relatives that you can rely on and who wouldn't judge you for your choices. And I also feel being financially independent is very important, because then you have a place of your own that you can go to instead of relying on your parents. So yeah, I think that's what I would tell the younger generation, but they are already doing really well.
Thanks for
I think
sharing.
this is
Go ahead, Gurleen. Were you going to add something, Gurleen?
No, I'm just adding to what Vinny's saying. I definitely think that the younger generation, sorry, am I audible?
Yeah.
I definitely feel like the younger generation today, because we've been interacting with a whole lot of youth in the recent past, especially this last 1 month over Pride Month. And I really, really feel like the late teens and the early 20-somethings are like, they're so much more intelligent about this. They're so much more in tune with themselves. I definitely feel like education will help. In schools and things like that. Definitely, if we can build on a system like that, that's definitely something that will help, except for only it coming from like the online world or representation. But a basic education towards these things would definitely help.
Actually, I want to build on that because the U.S. is an example, as the CG noted, is a prime example of a country where attitudes shifted so quickly toward LGBTQ communities. And in India, it's still evolving. But as you said, I think the younger generation maybe is slightly more open than the previous generation was. So I'm wondering what you all think it's going to really take to shift public attitudes towards LGBTQ communities. And actually, we have a question from the audience as well that's sort of tied to that. One of our audience members is asking whether maybe proper sex education in school was something that would help minimize the stigma around LGBTQ communities in India, or what other sorts of things do you think it's going to really take for public attitudes to shift? Gurleen, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, if you just take the example of the kind of school that I went to, which was supposed to be a really, really good school, and it was a convent school. It was the most sought after school, but it literally shut down an entire, like, football in our school after my batch was completely cancelled. So after my batch, none of our school children were allowed to play football because according to them, they thought that the football team was filled with lesbians, and I mean, that's such a uneducated, and it just comes from this space of deep stigma and just
Ignorance.
misinformation,
Yeah.
ignorance and misinformation. So really, like, I think that we need to start building on a more deeper understanding of what it means to be queer. And this doesn't just mean sex education. I think it's also gender studies. We're moving beyond that now. And like, I really feel like that is very, very important now. And we need to start addressing this to children from a much younger age. We need to start building on a syllabus almost, which can benefit the youth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Winnie, any thoughts you would like to add?
Yeah, I think Gurleen is absolutely right. We need to have more education around gender. And I also believe sensitization workshops need to be held. Like I've made sure that the last two organizations that I worked with, we had workshops there on sensitization around the LGBTQIA plus community. Because I think it's very, very important on how to respect people's boundaries and not ask inappropriate questions, especially when you're in a professional space. And I think it's the same for kids. The sooner we start teaching them, the more sensitized they would get, the more normalized the LGBTQIA plus community would get. And conversations like these, Alexander, this helps so much because we need to have more of these conversations about how we are also just humans.
Yeah.
What we tend to do in our bedrooms is our choice, and nobody has to be a part of that.
Yeah. Regardless of your sex or your gender or your, sexuality. Also stories, just children's stories. I feel like that would make such a big difference because I'm from a theater background, and I believe like that stories have so much of a power. If we had more people writing stories which were more fluid in nature and more accepting in nature, that would make such a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually something you said really struck a chord with me. Winnie, you were saying, we don't actually scrutinize, same heterosexual people's sex lives as much as we do, the LGBTQ community. I mean, it's literally just, it's people have private sex lives no matter who you're attracted to or what your gender is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tying into that, something else I'm curious to get your thoughts on. Winnie, we can start with you, but I'm wondering, what do you think that non-LGBTQ members of the Indian community can do as allies to LGBTQ people to support them? And actually, we have a question related to this from our audience about how a straight man who is a member of our audience today, what he can do to help sort of spread LGBTQ acceptance and this message of acceptance in India.
I think the first step of being a good ally is listening to our stories and actually listening to them, and not just like being a pseudo ally, because we have quite a few of those. And a lot of people think they are not homophobic, but there's so much of internalized homophobia that they don't even realize it when they talk about it. Like, for example, I had my reporting manager in one of my previous jobs who pretended to be a very good ally, and he made some very homophobic comments towards me, which were very unacceptable. He asked me whether something happened to me in my childhood and that's why I'm gay, or because I have three sisters and my mom dressed me up like a boy, and that's why I identify as a lesbian. And it's just shocking for me to hear that from someone who pretends to be such a good ally. And you get witty with your responses. So I told him that probably your mother dropped you on your head a couple of times when you were a kid. That's why you're like this. So I didn't know. Yeah, it's like you have to come up, you have to get wittier with your things. Right? Everything can't bog you down all the time. So I feel for being a good ally, you have to listen to our stories. You have to help us. Like during Pride Month, we've been talking about this. We are running a event called Digital Desi Pride on Gay Gays Bombay. And so many corporates and so many people approach us for free work during the Pride Month. I mean, what do you expect? This is, you want to put a rainbow there and say, okay, now we are allies. Now you work for us for free. Our time and effort also matters, and we put in a lot. And it's not just our sexuality. We are talented people and we're giving you that talent. So you better pay up for that talent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally
So I
fair,
think that's, if you want to be a good ally, support us, support our livelihoods. I can't pay my rent and products. I have to give my owner the money.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Gurleen, on what straight allies can do to better support the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, I mean, I personally had a problem with the word ally because I, for such a long time in my life, have had the privilege of living a heterosexual life, even though internally I was struggling with my sexuality and I was working towards coming to terms with it. So I actually understand exactly what straight people think and the things that they go through and the things that they experience on a regular basis, because I've lived that life. I've had the privilege of living that life. And so for me, I really feel like before the conversation around allyship comes, because one might be somebody working towards being a better ally. The other thing is just you think that you already are an ally. And I faced homophobia after coming out in a relationship with Winnie. I faced homophobia from both these kinds of people, and it's so internalized. It's so deep rooted that they're not even aware of the fact that it exists within them. I think before even like we get to that conversation, I think when you meet someone, just ask questions, have a dialogue with somebody and like try to learn a little bit more about where they're coming from, what their journeys have been, instead of just saying, a woman would become a lesbian only because she's unhappy in her marriage. No, I'm the example of somebody who was in a very happy marriage and then turned to being in a relationship with a woman, regardless of the fact that I was in a happy marriage. So that's not the quintessential reason that women become lesbians or because they went through abuse in their childhoods. That's not the reason. So all of these pre-existing sort of stories around being queer and the reasons that one might turn towards being queer, it's not a path you choose, So learn about my life through my lived experience and keep it individual, I think, rather than making it like a blanket understanding of things.
Trying to stereotype, put everything in a box. It's funny to hear you both saying this. You're speaking a lot about, I'm hearing this common theme of basically ignorance around this issue, which is, in a lot of ways, it's really not the fault of necessarily the Indian, society, because it's still a fairly new, I don't know, newly accepted concept, and it kind of reminds me of my childhood growing up in the 80s and 90s in the United States. It was very similar. There was a lot of ignorance around it. There still is in a lot of places, but much more so back then. And I remember just having to really be patient with people when you hear these sorts of stereotypes, about, oh, it's because you were too close to your mother and that's why you became gay, and all these things that, they're ridiculous sounding in the United States, but at the time they were quite common to hear these things. And I remember coming out to my parents and having to really be patient with them because their understanding was very limited, and it's just changed. I think some of it's a matter of time, and I think, as you've said, that ignorance is something that has to be addressed, but maybe, with compassion and love, just like we to receive. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I want to shift gears a little bit. We have an interesting question from the audience about sort of legal measures. The Supreme Court, as we all know, struck down Section 377 several years back. And so we have a question from the audience asking what other sort of legislative changes the LGBTQ community is hoping to see in the near future. And either one of you can take this. Yeah.
Vinny, you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I knew you were going to direct that to me. So I think one of the major things that we want to change is not the marriage law, because not all of us want to get married, and it's not very inclusive of the trans community. So that is one thing that both of us don't believe should be an immediate thing. But what we do believe in is that, especially the healthcare system that we have right now, and especially when COVID hit, we realized that we can't be on each other's insurance. Or if something happens to me, Gurleen still has to go through my family to get through to me, because they are my next of kin. And there's no legal way of putting her on my papers, which is very problematic, because fortunately for us, we have families that are understanding and have accepted us. But there are so many families where homophobia is still very prevalent and they haven't accepted their children. And when one of them has to go through a health issue, I personally know someone that the partner was not allowed to meet their partner because the family was like, we will not accept it.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, very problematic, and it's changing. Like companies like TCS have got that in picture now for the LGBTQI community, where you can put in your partners as your guardians and as your health insurance beneficiaries, nominees, beneficiaries. But I think that is something that needs to be addressed. It's very, very important. And also with the entire Transgender Act, it's very problematic. It's not taking any of their rights into consideration.
So building on that, I mean, you're saying maybe the answer is not through marriage, as we basically got in the United States, because this was very similar in the United States before gay marriage was legalized. It was a very similar, it was a common refrain you'd hear of same-sex couples, I can't even go visit my husband in the hospital or my partner in the hospital. So do you think that something like some sort of, like in France, they have something called Pax, or like a civil union, basically where it's some sort of legal mechanism that maybe
domestic partnership,
domestic partnership,
civil partnership, like UK has,
But this is something that would be more palatable for Indians to have because I'm not sure gay marriage may, it's in the courts right now in India, and I'm not sure how it's going to fare. But what do you think about a domestic partnership as a legal structure? Do you think that's something that would be more palatable for the Indian community, Indian society?
Honestly, it'll have its pros and cons, because as Indians, we are also very traditional. So some of the queer couples also believe that they should go the legal way and get married and, then start a family. But some of us who are also very old school, I'm 41, I do not believe in that system at all. It's a very heteronormative way of living. And it's okay if we don't get married, as long as we both love each other, support each other, respect each other. and are with each other, I think that's more than enough. I don't need a piece of paper to say that, okay, now Gurleen's going to be with you for the rest of your life, because apparently that doesn't work. So we've seen that.
You know, it's funny because you sound French. Actually, my husband is French, and he had the same line. You know, whenever we were together, when we first met and started dating, he was like, "I don't believe in marriage at all. I don't need it." You know, very many French people just never get married. But the fact of the matter is that there are so many protections that come with the legal document of a marriage certificate. So yeah, I mean, I think some solution, as you said, makes sense. Yeah. I don't know, Gurleen, what are your thoughts? Do you think a domestic partnership would be a
Yeah,
solution that may work?
I think I think again we're a long way from it, but I definitely feel like it could, like something like marriage could benefit a lot of people who come from backgrounds which are very conservative, and we're city folks. For us, we already are living our life with a certain amount of privilege. We're being able to, even though we have our own set of struggles, but like when we really talk to people, or when we really get to meet people who come from very, very rural backgrounds, for them, the only way to resolve this would be marriage, because there's no other way for them, because their families would not accept it otherwise. Section 377 has not, the decriminalization of it has not done too much for the people who come from rural backgrounds. It is just something that's done a lot for people who come from already existing backgrounds like ours, where we can just freely express ourselves, and we can just be out there. We can be seen on streets now and nobody's going to say anything. But the kind of homophobia that they go through within smaller places is something that I think some form of legal union is definitely going to benefit them for sure. And it's very, very important that this happens sooner rather than later, because we're losing lives. People are forced into conversion therapy. People are forced into marriages with people they don't want to. And it's just really painful to hear all of those stories. Really, really is. So it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, for sure.
It's funny because it sort of begs the question, which is going to come first, the chicken or the egg, because you've got the legislative side, but then you've also got societal, acceptance and the stigma. And I feel like, I don't know which is gonna, there has to be a watershed moment at some point that sort of opens the floodgates. But I mean, kind of building on that, I'm curious if you think that media might play a role in sort of shifting public opinions. Now with all of these OTP platforms, the Indian society has access to all of the shows on Netflix, and many shows on Netflix that have LGBTQ characters, and even now Indian movies like what was it, Shubh Mangal Zyada Savdhan. I mean, this is this movie that came out, which had a lot of it was pretty problematic, but it was very problematic. But it was a step. And so I'm just wondering, what do you think the role of maybe the media is in sort of shifting public perception of the LGBTQ community? This was huge in the United States. So I'm curious if you think India could follow a similar path. What are your thoughts, Gurleen? And then we'll move to you, Winnie.
I personally really feel like the representation we have right now is very problematic. I mean, I would give maybe like a thank you, maybe like 1%. Okay, thank you, you're representing us. But really, like, most of the stories you're telling us are like coming from a very male gaze, coming from a very patriarchal space. We are still being fetishized, or we are there for comic relief. So the right kind of representation, I feel like we're far away from it, but we're moving towards it because we're trending right now. So right now it's like, oh my God, you're queer. Oh my God, you're LGBTQIA. So, I mean, it's very exciting for people right now to I'm an actor, and I have been offered a couple of roles in the recent past just because I now openly identify as queer. And I have not received any offers before this. So I will definitely say, yeah, I mean, it's kind of good, but the stories need to be worked on big time. People need to be, queer people need to be asked what kind of stories they want to listen to, and their stories need to be taken seriously. So if that starts to happen, then maybe we're going to be headed in a better direction. But as of right now, it's very, very few movies which are doing it right, or very few shows. Vinny, what do you think?
What about in like the foreign media? I mean, you've got US and Australian and UK and Europe. You know, there's a lot of other shows and movies that are now available in India, and not all of them are sort of the stereotype. You know, a lot of times there's a lot of characters that are just happen to be gay, and it's totally normalized. And I feel like this is the healthiest way to sort of integrate. I mean, do you think that this is having an impact as well, that these are now available in India through the OTT platforms?
Yeah, definitely. That is definitely like, because we've literally we've grown up on that content. You know, I mean, we've gotten all of our understanding of sort of how to be queer from the West, you know, and that's definitely very, very important. And that is impacting a lot of the content that is happening in India as well. It's also impacting a lot of young minds in terms of the way that they're looking at coming out. Popular media is a big way to actually build the bridge. I mean, our parents are being able to relate to certain characters just because of that. So yeah.
Winnie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Gurleen put across absolutely seamlessly, because we talk about this all the time, about how the representation needs to change. And I keep telling her that I have not seen a single movie or a single series where someone like me is the main character and, you know, and is being justified for being that person. It's always a comic relief, or we're the villain, or we just die. So it's just that.
All right, well, I want to take another question from the audience. And the question is, do you think it is important or necessary to come out? And we don't have a lot of context with this question, but I want to add a little bit of context. I'm wondering if you all think it's necessary, important to come out both for the individual, and then how is it necessary or important to come out for Indian society and for the stigma around LGBTQ, the LGBTQ community in India? Let's start with you, Winnie.
Sure. So I get this a lot from a lot of young people who follow me on Instagram. And I always tell them that it's never important to come out. It's your choice. It's completely your choice. First comes the self-acceptance. And once you have that, things already get easier for you, because you get more confident in your skin and more comfortable with yourself. Then it's your choice whether you want to come out to people at home or your friends or your workplace, wherever you feel comfortable and where you feel the most safe. So it could be one person, it could be two people, or it could be just to yourself. So I just feel there's a lot of pressure around this coming out. And that's the first question that we get asked, like on every platform. And it's like, I've been saying this coming out story since I don't know how many years that I can recite it in my sleep now. So I absolutely don't think it's necessary to come out. It's absolutely your choice. And it should always be an individual choice.
Yeah, on your own terms, each individual on their terms. Yeah, that makes 100% sense. Yeah. Actually, I was outed by my hairdresser to my family on the same week that I had written a letter coming out to my parents, which I mailed to them. This was before email, really. And so I had mailed them a letter. And my hairdresser outed me to my mother at the same week. And so then they didn't even want to read the letter. They said, we're not going to read the letter. So,
oh my God.
I think I agree. I think it's important to be able to come out on your own terms, and whenever you're ready. I think that makes a lot of sense. And Gurleen, I mean, you're an example of that. You know, it's a long journey for you to come to terms with it yourself. Each of us, we have our own journey with, you know, detours and and everything. So yeah, I think, you know, you're a perfect example of that. You know, you come out when you're ready and when you feel, yeah, it's
completely safe. Yeah.
yeah, safe,
I mean, I
exactly.
had to be in therapy for like a year and a half before I
Totally.
decided that this was okay for me and that I was finally ready for it. And I had a legitimate panic attack the night
Totally.
before I came out to my parents, and it was
Yeah.
very difficult. But yeah, safety first, always.
Mhm. Yeah, and you're not alone there. I mean, I think that's a common thing you hear. I mean, you know, we all have seen the statistics, I'm sure, about, you know, suicide rates are higher among the LGBTQ youth than straight youth and all of this. So I think, you know, that comes into play for sure. Well, we have another question from the audience I think is interesting. What we've talked a lot about sort of the stigma around LGBTQ, the LGBTQ community in India. How do you think that that India will perceive gender and sexual identity, sexual orientation 50 years from now, if we look 50 years from now? Do you think things will be much different than they are now? Yeah, I don't know. Looking at the trajectory of things, either one of you can take this.
I think, Gulin, you should take that because I'll be dead and gone by then. I'm already 41.
I will too.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that that is the case. I hope that 50 years from now, things are a lot better, because I really feel like right now we're in the middle of a culture shift. You know, I think we're living in that period of time where things are shifting, and that all, like, it's like the pot is boiling right now. You know, the soup isn't completely cooked. So
Yeah.
we're right now in that stage where all of the vegetables are like simmering and the conversations are happening, and that it's almost like a revolution. And we're in the midst of it. Things are shifting every day. There is new conversation around it. There are new terminologies which are coming up around gender, around sexuality. And I really feel like it's going to start shifting, because today I can sit with my cis het friends. For those of you who don't know what cis het is, when you're basically assigned gender at birth is the same gender that you identify with today, is basically cis het. So when I'm sitting with my cis hetero friends, I'm talking about these kinds of things which earlier used to be limited only to conversations between the LGBTQIA space. So I already feel like that shift has started to happen. There are questions which are coming my way every single day. There are questions which are being thrown towards Winnie every single day. I definitely feel positive about the fact that 50 years from now, we will be in a better place than we are today. And we will all work towards making it a better place, hopefully. The conversation will shift.
Yeah, I have to say, I also hold out hope for that. I mean, I'm an Firang, you know, who's been living in India off and on for the last over 10 years. And I've seen a shift over the last 10 years in India, and just in the last 10 years. And so, and I think there's also been a shift globally in the last 10 years. And I think that globalization is gonna, you know, that impacts culture as well. So I think I hold out hope as well. And I think you may be right that we're on the precipice of change, I think, in India. And that's encouraging. That's encouraging to see. We actually have a question, and I'm not sure if either of you will be able to speak to this, but we have a lot of questions about the Hijra community. And I don't know if either of you has any experience with or has worked with the Hijra community in India. But we have several questions about sort of how they fit into the LGBTQ experience, and sort of how you see your role working with the LGBT community, or sort of what your connection is to the Hijra community.
Winnie, you want to take that?
Actually, Alexander, we're not very. I don't think we'd be the right people to speak about that, because they have a very different struggle, and I don't want to speak on their behalf.
I appreciate that.
And I do not want to come across as this privileged, also a cis woman who's speaking on their behalf.
I appreciate that. And we're actually, this is part, as you all know, this is part of a series that the consulate is doing, and this series is more specifically about the lesbian experience in India. And I think we're going to be doing different events on different types of experiences in the LGBTQ community. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to have another discussion about that.
I'm
topic.
really glad the question has come up, though. It's
very interesting.
I'm really happy that the question has come up, because it's a very important conversation, and the trans folks, the intersex community, and the Hijra community definitely need a lot more representation in spaces. So thanks for asking the question.
A lot more support as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I appreciate your response, Winnie, because actually my youngest sibling came out as trans about 4 or 5 years ago, and my whole family turned to me like I was going to have all the answers. And I was like, that the LGBTQ community gets lumped together, like, because it's kind of like, all these misfits, that the society sees us as all these misfits and puts us all together. And in a way, I mean, we each have our own unique experiences, and we can't necessarily speak to other experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are still a very dysfunctional family. So.
Yeah. Yes, well put. So we have a question about, so it's not really gender identity, but we have a question from a psychologist about how he or she can work with their clients, because this psychologist says, I help my clients integrate masculine and feminine polarities within the clients, regardless of the gender they were assigned at birth, as every individual has those polarities. And there's a lot of misunderstanding around gender and sex and gender expression and gender identity. And so I guess the question is there a tendency for one partner to identify more with masculine traits or feminine traits, one person to identify more with masculine traits or feminine traits in the LGBTQ community? And I guess sort of how does the gender expression and gender identity play into your sexual orientation as well?
I think, Gurleen, you should go with this because you just performed on this yesterday.
I mean, I identify as a genderqueer woman, and Winnie identifies. So to just give a basic idea of things, Winnie is a cisgendered woman who, since a very, very young age, has identified with the masculine presenting part of it. And so the masculine presenting part of it is essentially a gender expression. And her gender expression is masculine, which means that she dresses up as a butch woman. She feels like she is butch. She would probably shop from the men's section, even though I don't really agree with the men's section and the women's section. It should just be my section and your section. But that's where Winnie would shop from, because she identifies as a butch lesbian woman. And I, on the other hand, since a very, very young age, have always kind of struggled with both parts of my identity. So I have always been fluid with it, because I was also very much in touch with my masculine side as well as my feminine side. And there are times where I feel like I'm both. There are times when I feel like I'm neither, which is why I'm gender fluid and genderqueer. And I think that these are not things that are limited to the LGBTQI community. I really feel like this is an overall universal feeling. And most of us have both or neither, and it's just really about what our individual experiences with gender have been, what our cultural understanding of it has been, how were we raised, what was it that society threw at us, and how we dealt with it. So really, I mean, gender to me is very, very fluid. And it's really how you feel on the inside. It's not necessarily only about what you wear or how you, it's a lot deeper than that. To just put it as a short understanding, I hope that helps.
Yeah, Winnie, I mean, love to give you a chance to weigh in as well.
Sorry.
I'd love to give you a chance to weigh in as well on sort of gender and the role that gender plays in, I guess, sexuality.
Yeah, I think, like Gurleen rightly said, I don't think clothes have any gender. And I've always identified as a butch lesbian. And to be honest, Alexander, when I was growing up, I thought I was the only lesbian in my school or the whole world because I didn't know anyone like me. So I didn't even have the terms for it. I didn't have any non-binary terms. I didn't know the term lesbian. I didn't know bisexual. The only term that I knew was gay. And that's how I identified as. So I think for me, it's been very different. And now I'm coming to the understanding of how things are changing. And it's also difficult for me to put a grasp on it and understand everything. So I can understand sometimes where the cishet people also come from because it's so evolving and so changing on a daily basis. But yeah, I think we just have to keep learning and keep pushing ourselves to learn more.
I love that. I want to actually let our Consul General, he has a question he'd like to ask. I'm going to hand the mic to him.
Thanks, Alexander and Winnie and Gurleen. It's been wonderful hearing both of your stories and responses. I actually have two questions. Let me start with the first. I'll tell them you both though. So just a little bit of context. You know, the history of civil rights in the U.S. has been peppered by examples of groups not always being mutually supportive of each other, and you know, the more marginalized within marginalized communities feeling not supported by the somewhat less marginalized. And I was thinking about this as you expressed reluctance to talk about the Hijra community, and then Alexander pointing out about how this is all lumped in together. So, you know, for example, an obvious example that often comes up is African-American women who in the earlier parts of the civil rights movement really felt unsupported and marginalized and even subjected to misogyny by some of the male leaders of the community. So my first question is, here in India, and this definitely happened, and I would argue probably still does happen among different aspects of the gay community. So the first part of my question was, what is your experience in terms of support or not support from gay men? Do you feel that gay men in India are supporting the entire community? I mean, arguably as the less marginalized, as you said. I mean, you talked about the trans community being the most marginalized, for example. But you know, certainly in the U.S., and hopefully Alexander will back me up here, I've heard lots of criticisms that even come up to this day from the lesbian community of really serious misogyny from the gay male community. So that was my first question. And the second question, I'm not exactly sure how to put this, but Gurleen, I've been struck by what appears to have been a really supportive your ex-husband, you know, in your whole in what you've described so far in your journey. And I'm just curious to hear why you think that was, or what you think about that. I mean, I don't want to take the spotlight away from your journey and your experience, but is there anything about that experience that would help others, right? You know, who find themselves, you know, how did you help your husband, or maybe how did he help you come to terms with this in a way where you felt mutually supportive? Thanks.
Much for that. So I think I'll go with the gay men because I speak about them quite a lot. And like you rightly said, I always say that they occupy too much space. And no, it's every party. Sorry, I'm not trying to be like rude, but
yeah, absolutely right.
Yeah, it's like, so earlier we didn't have any specific LBT parties where it was only for women or non-binary. We only had parties which included the entire community. And every event or party or workshop that you would attend, there would be like 1,000 gay men and I think around 50 women.
Lesbians.
And it would be traumatic just to see so many men around, whether they are gay men or cis. It's for lesbians. It is traumatic. I'm sorry. It's a fact. So, and then they would occupy so much space and not let you speak And it's still like that here. And there is a lot of misogyny, and there is no support from the gay men towards lesbians, especially. And the spaces that they have are very male dominated. And it's very difficult for us to even put a word in, forget about anything else. So yeah, it's been like that, and I think it's not going to change anytime soon, because they are not very inclusive of having that presence of women around, because though they are gay men and they have their own struggles, but they've still grown up in this very entitled and privileged and very patriarchal kind of a household, which India has, where men are above women, and irrespective of their sexuality, it's still going to be the same. Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and this is Vinny saying this despite the fact that she in fact has a whole lot of really beautiful
Yeah,
friends
I
who
know.
are gay men. And so
But they
obviously
know this
I
is
don't
not
think this
addressed
is
to
a,
them.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is
right.
obviously not a rule of thumb for all gay men across, but this is a the spaces which are dominated by gay men, I think are like that. So yeah, that's definitely. And thank you, David, for asking the question to me as well. The relationship that I had with my then partner was one of a very open mind, and in how do I say, in theory, it was very easy for him to understand the struggles of the queer community and of what it might entail uh, being queer. But when it came down to me actually wanting something and standing up for myself and asking for it, it was very, very difficult. So it came from a space of support, in terms of the fact that he would never come in the way of me choosing what I wanted to choose at the end of the day, just that he wouldn't be part of that choice. So I think that's where it kind of came from, and it entailed a lot of heartbreak, it entailed a lot of pain, a lot of therapy, a lot of very long drawn conversations, and eventually space and distance, which kind of gave him the perspective to understand that this is in fact something that she needs to do for herself, and it's not something that she's doing to me. I think that's where the shift, I think, happened. Also, I think he did up a lot. He did a lot of reading. I think after this happened, he really kind of went into that rabbit hole of trying and understanding what happens inside of the mind of somebody who is actually trying to explore their sexual orientation. And so it was a lot of reading up that he needed to do, a lot of educating himself, despite the fact that he was somebody who was very educated and open-minded. So I think, yeah, that was what the journey was. Now we're very good friends. Vinny and him are very, very good friends now. And we're going to be, I mean, the two of them are going to be meeting up in July for the first time, hopefully hanging out with each other. And yeah, I mean, the intention is to be one big, beautiful modern family where we can all learn to love and respect each other, and not kind of be bogged down by our insecurities and things like that. So that's to
I
answer.
love that. That's beautiful. I think I'm really struck by how, I'm sure it's been a complicated journey, but I'm really struck that, it seems like the intent is really to be open-minded and to support each other. And like I said, I'm sure it's more complex than that, but it's nice to hear that that's the intention. That's really wonderful. So we have time for one more question, and this question kind of builds on that. And we've talked a little bit about this, about the role that allies or non-LGBTQ members can play. And I think building on sort of what you've just described about your ex-husband, I want to close with this this question. And also, I think this is it reflects sort of that the audience that we have today there's a lot of hetero heterosexual people in our audience today. I think that's wonderful that they're here. I think that alone shows a lot of support. So thank you all for being here to support us in this program. So I want to end with this question. What are some of the big common mistakes, the most common mistakes that allies make, and what should allies be working on? This comes from one of our straight audience members. So I'll give you each a chance to talk a little bit about that.
So I'll
What
go
are the
first.
common mistakes? Yeah.
I think the first thing is pronouns. It's very, very important and imperative in today's day and time to ask someone what their pronouns are, because misgendering happens a lot in the community. And for me, it doesn't affect me because I've always referred to myself as she and her, and I'm also okay with any other pronouns. But not everyone's journey is the same. There's so much of dysphoria that people go through with struggling with their gender, their sexuality, and how they identify themselves as. So I think the first thing that you could ask is, can you please let me know your pronouns? And it has to be that simple, because so many people come up to us and ask us, how should we ask someone's pronouns? You just have to say it in the most simplest words. Can you please let me know your pronouns? And it is very respectful, and we will love you for that, because we want that to happen.
Yeah, it shows an interest. It shows that you care as an ally, that you want to make someone feel comfortable and seen. And yeah. What about you, Gurleen? What are some common mistakes that allies make, or what could they work on to better support the LGBTQ community?
Really, I think just like move away from looking at somebody and assuming something about them on the basis of the way that they look, you know, like, and this is also true for gay men, you know, anybody who might be slightly effeminate, to assume that they're gay, to assume that they're sissy, or any of those kinds of words, you know, to like not use disrespectful words, which you know for a fact, I mean, and everybody knows on the inside when something is disrespectful, you know, so to not assume things about any of us on the basis of the way that we look, I think that would definitely be one thing that can, just like you can ask pronouns, you can also ask other things, as long as the person is willing to communicate with you about that. So I think that's one other thing that I would say is